Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 27. So, when this episode goes up, it'll be the day before Thanksgiving here in the U.S., but as I record this, it's actually a week before that. Still, the concept of giving thanks, of being thankful, that's been on my mind a lot the past week. I think for a lot of us, I don't really know who all is listening to this. Maybe things are just fine for you, but I know that a lot of people, and I'd assume that a lot of the people who listen to this show, a lot of us haven't maybe felt like we've had a lot to be thankful for this past week. I certainly don't blame you if that's where you are. I'm kind of there as well. But, thinking about all this, it makes me think of this little dinner time routine that we do in my family, a little family ritual, if you will. Every night when we sit down to dinner, we go around the table and say something that we're thankful for. It doesn't have to be anything big or important, just anything at all. For example, my 2-year-old often says that she's thankful for a trip to Disneyland that we took 2 months ago. She always says that she's thankful for going there with one of her grandparents that wasn't actually there, but, it's very cute. And for the past 3 nights, my 8-year-old has been saying that he's thankful to be eating rice. And, a lot of times one or the other of the kids, they'll grumble or roll their eyes or say they don't want to say anything, they had a bad day or something. And I get it, I would have done exactly the same thing when I was a kid. I'm sure if my mom is listening right now that she could probably list any number of times that I grumbled at her about stuff. She probably is listening. Hi, Mom. But anyway, the whole point of this exercise is just to be able to come up with anything positive, even on a bad day. And, that's just been on my mind a lot the past week, and it's something that's been useful for me. I'm not trying to tell anybody else how to feel, If you're upset or scared or angry right now, I get it, and I don't want to take that away from you. Just, for me, this is something that helps me get through the day, and right now, I do have things to be thankful for. I'm thankful for my family, that they're safe and healthy. I'm thankful to have good friends. I'm thankful to get the chance to talk to you all and to be able to have these conversations with my guests. If you're in the mood to think about this, if you're able, maybe you could share what you're thankful for. You could tweet at me, at Channel Open Pod. All right, so today's guest is author Lindsay Hatton, whose debut novel Monterey Bay I read over the summer, right when it first came out, and I just loved it. I'm originally from the Monterey Peninsula. I went to high school in Carmel, and I get back there pretty frequently since I still have a lot of family in the area, not to mention my wife's family. So I don't know, maybe I'm predisposed to liking a book set in an area that I love so much. But on the other hand, knowing and loving that place as much as I do, I think I'd also maybe be less forgiving if it felt wrong or didn't live up to the feelings I have about the place. Here's what I can say for sure. The book is really well written. It did some unexpected and kind of wonderful things with the setting and the characters, particularly because, and you're going to hear a bunch about this in the conversation, but 2 of the main characters are John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts, and that was a lot of fun. The book is contemplative at times. It's funny. It's sexy sometimes. It was just a really great read for me. Anyway, let's get into the conversation, shall we? Here's me and Lindsay Hatton. Oh, and one last note real quick. This was recorded back in September, so no election stuff. Here we go. Okay, so how are you doing today?
I'm good. I am all caffeinated and ready to go. I thought it was my preschooler's first day of school today, but it wasn't. But we showed up anyways to find all of her teachers cleaning the classrooms and preparing, and so she flipped out. And they gave her some Oreos, so no harm, no foul. But it's been, an exciting morning.
Yeah.
Already some mishaps.
Yeah. My second started kindergarten last week, so we're just going through that adjustment right now.
Oh, you have two?
I have three, actually.
You have three? Oh my God, how old are they?
The oldest is 8, and then the middle one's about to turn 5. She'll be 5 the week after next, and then the youngest is 2.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I have 7 and 4, two of them. And yeah, occasionally we think about a third.
Going from 2 to 3, I think everybody has their own experience. For us, it was a much bigger step than from 1 to 2. But I think,
yes, that is what I hear.
Yeah, I think part of that too was just that our second she was a particularly easy baby, so.
And ours was a pain in the ass. So we decided, as my husband says, she's a good closer. But yeah, kids, they're good. We love them. We love the kids.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think of who it was exactly that I heard about your book through. And it was through somebody, I think I saw the title get tweeted out by, and I don't know how to pronounce his name, Ruman.
Ruman Alam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, here's a book about, place that I know, and so it kind of caught my attention. And then, I saw I clicked through and saw the title page or the cover, and I thought, that name sounds awfully familiar to me. And I had to dig through my memory a bit, but it turns out we do have a connection, the two of us.
Yeah.
That, we both worked at the Monterey Bay Aquarium at the same time when we were in high school.
That's right.
I always think of that. I still, to this day, I worked there one summer when I was 15, I think, and then again another summer as a visitor presentations intern when I was in college. And to this day, I tell everybody that was the best job I ever had.
Oh, it was so great. I totally agree. Yeah.
And it's interesting reading this book, which, by the way, I really, really enjoyed. It was really great.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And the book, just for the listeners, the book's title is Monterey Bay. And it's sort of, well, why don't I let you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a hard one to describe, but I will try my best. It's I think it's a hybrid of like straight up historical fiction and also literary fiction and speculative historical fiction. It takes place in 2 time periods, 1940 and 1998. And the 1940 time period is what I would call the more straight historical fiction part of the book. It has characters from real life, such as John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts. Ed Ricketts is better known as Doc from Steinbeck's Cannery Row, and was also Steinbeck's lifelong best friend and muse. And that 1940 storyline revolves around a girl named Margot Fiske. She's 15 years old when the story begins, and she comes to Monterey with her father, who's an eccentric entrepreneur who, for the course of her entire life, has been dragging her around from country to country and place to place and kind of teaching her the ways of the business world. And she arrives in Monterey and immediately falls in with the Cannery Row crowd and falls in love with Ed Ricketts. And that teenage romance, well, she's a teenager. He's in his 40s at the time, so there's a gaping age difference between the two. But that kind of illicit and doomed love affair is what inspires Margot Fiske, at least in my novel, to found the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And so that's where I kind of depart from standard historical fictional fare. I kind of invent an alternate founding story of the aquarium. And that's the part of the book that takes place in 1998 when Margot is 73 years old. And she's kind of looking back on that experience.
Yeah.
From the eyes of an older woman.
Yeah. Growing up there, so you're from Monterey originally, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm from Carmel Valley, pretty close by.
Nice.
And it was definitely whenever I see anything in really in anything, but particularly in fiction, in literary fiction, that references places I know, that always really has a tendency of sucking me in. And I thought it was really interesting reading this book as someone who grew up in that area and
Yeah.
how there's so much about it that's so familiar.
Uh-huh.
And particularly having worked at the aquarium and having just even, I think, people that didn't work there, that place is such a big part of the Monterey area and the community there, and it's all sort of present in everyone's consciousness all the time.
Right. Yeah, totally.
That, getting this sort of alternate story was really, it was a funny experience I think it would be different for someone who wasn't from there. The ways that there are so many things that sort of, remind you of home, but then also little details that are changed for the story that kind of like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, it's an odd journey I'm asking the reader to go on with me, especially one who's familiar with the area and with the actual history of the aquarium. But I don't know how you felt when you worked there, but I always, oh gosh, so I did the high school internship, and then I came back for 2 summers in college, and I also spent like a J term there, interning for the Tuna Research and Conservation Center, just right next door at Hopkins. So, and in all those experiences, like, I don't know, I always felt like there was something else beneath the surface, from all I know of Julie Packard, the aquarium's real life founder. She is so balanced and kind and no drama, which is no fun to write about. And I spent a lot of time when I was younger kind of fantasizing about a different founding legend that had more, I don't know, chaos and romance and revenge. And I guess that was percolating in my mind the whole time. I mean, during formative adolescent years too, when all those big emotions are right there at the surface too.
Yeah. I think there's something, and you actually, I can't remember exactly the passage, but there's a part in the book where you sort of talk about this as well, that there's something about that area that's just sort of inherently dramatic.
Yes, I totally think so.
That there's something about the landscape there, the way that the coast is rocky, and, something about the way the ocean looks that's very different from just about anywhere else I've ever been, and the fog.
Mm-hmm. Which the fog is an interesting point. Like in my childhood, and let me know what your impressions are of this. But when I was a kid, I remember it being foggy all the time. And I go back there now, and it's so much warmer, and the skies are so much clearer all the time. It freaks me out.
Yeah.
But you grew up in the valley, so maybe you had it's sunnier out there. So.
Yeah. The valley, when I was a kid, it was famous for having like 350 days of sun a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I went to school in Carmel.
Oh, that's right. Okay, you were at Carmel High.
Yeah. So,
yep.
Which always was kind of a strange thing. Like Carmel High is geographically one of the biggest school districts in in California anyway.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and because it goes all the way like way east into the valley, even past where I lived in the Carmel Valley Village. And then it goes way south down into Big Sur. And so people would like to there's only one high school, so people would be on the bus for like an hour sometimes just to get to school. But along the coast where I was in high school and middle school, it was definitely foggy almost every day is what I remember as well. Yeah. And it is weird going back, as an adult to see how things are different. Mm-hmm. And that's actually something that I felt like was a real running theme of your book, this feeling of change,
right?
That at times, like there's a point in one of the 1998 chapters where you talk about the weather and the changing and the water temperature changing in the bay itself, but also just like the changing nature of the community. How like in the 40s it was a very industrial sort of town with the fishing and that sort of thing, to what it becomes in the 90s and beyond, where it's very tourism based. Mm-hmm. Really changes the character of the thing, and that's something that's definitely, like I say, it's a running theme in the book, and I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I do too. I find it absolutely fascinating, and it got even more interesting the more research I did into the history of Monterey and that conflict between between tourism and industry, and leisure and labor. There's an excellent book by a woman named Connie Chang. It's called Shaping the Shoreline. And it goes into a lot of those questions about who takes precedence and whose stories emerge as the ones that that live on to shape a place. You know, in the before the sardine industry cropped up, Monterey was one of the nation's biggest tourist attractions, thanks to the Hotel Del Monte, and many presidents stayed there. A lot of luminaries, lots of writers. It was one of Robert Louis Stevenson's favorite place, and then the tourism industry was kind of knocked off its pedestal by the fishing industry. And, you know, now we're seeing a wave of something similar, but also different, because the aquarium, in terms of the way it's reshaped that community, it's an odd, I don't know, it might be a hybrid in a lot of ways between the two. It's relying on the bounty of the bay and its biodensity to attract money and people, but in obviously a very different way than the fishing industry once did.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an amazing place in terms of that kind of interplay.
Yeah, one of the things that I know, my family is still there, and my wife's family is actually from Big Sur. They live there. And
is everybody okay with the recent fires?
Yeah. I mean, we know people that it's a small community, so we do know some people that were affected more, but like everybody in my family and in her family is fine.
Good.
But we definitely, and we spend time going back there a few times a year, and it's one of the things that people definitely complain about locals there, which I remember as a kid too. Everybody would complain about how many tourists there were, especially going up and down Highway 1.
Yeah.
But it's really gotten to the point of almost ridiculousness at this point.
I know. And that's it's something I think about a lot, as far as the time I spent at the aquarium and the time you spent at the aquarium was, little did we know how sleepy it was at that point. It seemed like a huge juggernaut even then, but just the prominence it's taken on is really intense. And I respect so much the aquarium's mission statement and its eye towards conservation and education. But there is, despite the nobility of all those intentions, like you said, there is the side effect of the place becoming so crowded and so different. And it's hard not to mourn that as someone who saw the place when it was different. But then again, when we were kids, the tourist situation was also pretty intense. So
yeah, I mean, we thought.
Would you ever go back there to live or no?
That's something I've thought about a lot.
Me too.
And the main thing that has kept me from going back there is just that for my day job, I'm an electrical engineer, and there aren't really jobs like that around there.
Right. Yeah.
But it's interesting. I actually, so artistically, I'm mainly a photographer, and I've been working for several years now on this thing, because so I grew up in the Valley,
mm-hmm.
but my mom and my stepdad actually moved away to Virginia when I was shortly after college, and my brother moved to town, and he lives in Monterey now, and all of my friends moved away, and I didn't go back to that place for like 7 years. I would go to Salinas or Monterey or Big Sur, but I didn't go into the Valley because it's not on the way to anything,
Right.
And when I finally did go back, it was this place that I recognized, but also really didn't recognize.
Yeah.
And
what didn't you recognize about it?
It's funny. There's so many things, little things that I imagine. I remember I've talked to some people here and there as I go back to visit and take pictures who don't see that. They see it so incrementally that they don't notice it. But to me, it's one of the things that really stood out is that I remember Carmel Valley, especially Carmel Valley Village, being very, very sort of inward looking. It was not exactly self-sufficient, but most of the businesses, for example, were aimed at locals. There were a lot of restaurants, but they were all aimed at locals, and there were a lot of sort of local services. And now when you go in there, it's really striking how like everything is very outward facing. Like everything is about drawing people in. There are a ton of wineries and
The winery, that's, I was wondering if you were going to mention the wineries. That's what I've noticed too, is how there's a huge industry now, surrounding that. It's crazy.
And just it really it also feels a lot wealthier than it used to. I mean, the Carmel and Monterey area has always had a lot of money in it, but when I was growing up, the valley was sort of an interesting mix of like people with $1 million homes, but also like ranchers' kids and stuff like that. So it has to me, it feels very different now. But at the same time, the landscape itself is almost unchanged.
Yeah, and that's like that's the wonderful and almost spooky elemental part of it that I hope to kind of get at in my book a little bit. It's we are not by any means the first artists to bemoan how that landscape has simultaneously changed and remained the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the epigraph of my book is an excerpt of a poem from Robinson Jeffers, and I'm pretty convinced his entire oeuvre is dedicated to bemoaning what we are currently bemoaning. He was a contemporary of Steinbeck and Ricketts, and the suburbanization of that area, in his words, was something that he was always sad about. And then Steinbeck, you know, I feel like most of his career, or a lot of it, is devoted to themes of nostalgia, with the Central Coast being the focus of that. You know, later on in his life, when the sardine boom had ended and no one quite knew what to do with Cannery Row, and I think I mentioned this in my book, I don't remember now, but he has this famous little joke he made when people asked him, "Oh, well, what should we do about Cannery Row?" He said, "Oh, you should hire some actresses to play hookers and pump in the smell of sewage and fish meal."
Yeah, that was in your book.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad that stayed at this point. I'm still unsure what was edited out. But yeah, that whole issue of nostalgia and authenticity and who the landscape is for. You know, you mentioning Carmel Valley Village becoming more outward facing. I found that to be a really interesting way of putting it. I like that.
Thanks. It's an interesting thing, I think, you know, being from that area. It's such a small, it's not very populous, and, you know, it still has that sort of small town feeling. I always think it's hilarious that now I live in San Diego now, and you live in Boston, if I recall.
Cambridge, but yeah, you know,
so
technically,
but like actual cities.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up, going to Carmel High School and feeling like the kids from Monterey High were like tough. But I think it's interesting, you know, it's got that small town feeling, both places still.
Absolutely.
But there's this artistic sort of lineage in that area that tends to, that you kind of can't get away from. You know, whether it's Steinbeck, obviously, or, say, Ansel Adams or Edward Weston, photographically in Carmel, or, you know, the Beats, Lawrence Ferlinghetti or Kerouac.
Yeah.
It's been so... Henry Miller.
Yeah.
It's been so thoroughly inspiring to so many, like, just huge figures in literature and art that it's sort of hard to escape. And that was another thing that I was thinking about a lot as I was reading your book, that, you know, Steinbeck is both literally a figure in your book, as he's a character in it, but also, like, between the title and the setting, you can't really help sort of having that comparison in your mind a little bit. And I thought that it was really interesting that, like, the opening of your book, the first chapter, is such a, like, clearly sort of homage to the opening of Steinbeck's Cannery Row, but then immediately after that you depart from that sort of stylistically and structurally and really sort of go off in your own direction. That seems to be something, I mean, it obviously is something that is an imperative for any artist to sort of forge your own path. Yeah.
I mean, that connection with Steinbeck was, it was something I entered into carefully and almost begrudgingly, to be perfectly honest about it. It's I knew it was a minefield, and I could either tiptoe through it or go at it full speed, and I ended up choosing the latter. But that wasn't without a lot of deliberation on my part and a lot of research. I don't know how it was for you growing up in that area with the legacy of Steinbeck, but I don't actually have any memories of reading him as a kid, even though I know I did. It was more of a cumulative, it just kind of seeped in. And again, I know I read his work in school, but revisiting it as an adult was almost like, unpacking the contents of your childhood room, and finding things that, like you said earlier, were so familiar yet so different. And that was a really pleasurable part of the writing experience, is rediscovering his work and discovering what he was like as a person. Thankfully for me, so many of his letters and journals are in published form now. And so it was very easy for me to access the way he might have spoken to his friends. And, in there I found some things that I loved about him and some things that I didn't love about him. And I don't know, did my best to put those more subjective appraisals aside in favor of presenting him exactly how he might have been in 1940, which was a very specific time in his life. He was not a happy guy in 1940. He was going through a divorce. The fame that followed the publication of Grapes of Wrath was taking a huge toll on him. And there are some readers who were like, "Oh man, who is this? Who is this jerk?" I didn't know Steinbeck was this awful. And my response to that was, well, I don't think he was that awful most of the time. But in 1940, he had some stuff to work out, and I would assume that someone like Margot, my protagonist, appearing on the scene would have been exactly the thing he would have least wanted in his world, which was very fun for me to play with as a writer. I enjoyed that conflict very much.
Yeah, it was definitely, I don't know, it was interesting seeing this sort of, great figure, just being portrayed, as an actual person. You have a tendency, I think, or I do anyway, to think of people like that, and you look at stuff like the Grapes of Wrath, and you're like, this guy won the Nobel Prize, and you tend to think of them in a certain sort of exalted way, and here you're presenting him as sometimes sort of self-absorbed and jealous, kind of at times almost preening and often condescending. It was really, I don't know, it made me laugh actually several times.
Oh, good. I see him as the comic relief in the book myself. I mean, it's not like laugh out loud comic relief, but yeah, I had a good time with some of his quirks for sure. And I mean, everything. I mean, if you ever have any inclination, I highly recommend reading his journals, especially surrounding the time he was writing Grapes of Wrath. It's a book called Working Days. I forget who edited it, but it's definitely worth visiting if you want just kind of a taste of him. He was always convinced he was getting the flu. He was always convinced he was getting fat. He had this endless list of physical ailments that he was always complaining about. He was like us, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. He wasn't. It is easy to see, the Nobel laureate as this exalted figure, but I think creative types have the reputation they do for a reason. Yeah. And Steinbeck was definitely one of those. That being said, though, I mean, one thing I do admire about him, and the admiration only grew as I researched him as a person, was the commitment that he showed to social causes in books like Grapes of Wrath. He was not a dilettante as far as that is concerned. That was a lifelong commitment for him. Is that area of social justice, and that was really, really cool to find out. That wasn't just an intellectual exercise for him. He was very much committed to that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, hearing you talk about your admiration for the man. I read an essay that you wrote for LitHub, I think, where you were talking about how people always ask you after reading this book, like whether you like Steinbeck. and how that's sort of not really the right question.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting, too, how very late in the book, this is in, I'm looking at it right now, chapter 26, there's a little segment right, it's like the very end of the book where Margot is killing time in her office, and she pulls out a copy of, she starts leafing through her Steinbeck little collection. And I sort of had the impression that some of her feelings about Steinbeck and his work were very similar to things that you were expressing in that essay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is one of the few instances in the book in which Margot actually is a proxy for me. I don't think the question of liking him is the right question, as you said. I think in appraising someone like Steinbeck and using him as a character, there should be a more objective set of concerns put forth. Maybe objective's not the right word. Or maybe an openness to contradiction.
And the word "like" is just so simple.
Yeah, it's a terrible word. Yeah, I feel that way about a lot of personal literary heroes. It's, growing up, I think we were among, hopefully, maybe the last generation in which, literary education is so centered on, dead white guys, as the phrasing goes. And I remember very clearly reading certain things as a young person and as a grown woman, and having that contradiction of, well, the canon tells me that this man is a genius, and a genius is openly denigrating women and minorities, etc. How do you reconcile that? And I don't think you can. I just think it's something you have to sit with, and that's what I hope to do with Steinbeck. An admiration of the work does not mean anything except that.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is up for grabs in a way.
It's definitely, as you mentioned, it's like, especially if you grow up in that area, he's such a large figure in even just as part of the school curricula. And it's funny, I actually haven't read anything by Steinbeck since maybe shortly after college.
Yeah.
And I, at that time, had read East of Eden like 3 or 4 times.
Oh, wow.
And there's just something about the way that he writes places that,
I know.
Yeah, that really has always resonated with me. There's something about
So
the way
good.
that he thinks about places like their characters that always really drew me in, because they're very similar to the way that I think about places. And I thought it was, as I was reading your book, one of the things that really struck me is that that you do that also in this book, but in a really, really different way. And this is actually even sort of, you can note it in the titles of your 2 respective books about that place, that his title is Cannery Row, and in his book, Cannery Row, like the city and the landscape are really a character unto themselves, where your book is titled Monterey Bay, and not Monterey Peninsula, but Monterey Bay, where the times when I really felt like you were sort of using a place as that kind of a figure was really the ocean itself. And I thought that was just a fascinating comparison.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really ever thought about it that way, but I think you're totally right. Which is not to put, a value judgment on one approach or the other.
No, not at all.
Yeah, but it's, I too very, very much admire the way Steinbeck goes about landscape. And it's something I paid very close attention to when I was rereading his work. So, East of Eden, of course, it's a long book. It's a true epic. And so it can bear the weight of that, very, very broad approach to geography. And then a book like Cannery Row, it's much shorter and smaller in scope. And he has a very different approach to landscape in Cannery Row versus East of Eden. And that was like a primary stylistic concern for me in my book too, because I kind of wanted to have it both ways. And it's really hard to do that, I discovered. My book isn't as short as Cannery Row, but it's certainly not as long as East of Eden. And, how to incorporate the weight of a landscape and also somehow get a plot in there. It's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. Because East of Eden, so plot heavy, in a wonderful way. I think it's intricate and beautiful. But then like Cannery Row is basically the story of like a couple of guys trying and failing to throw another guy a party. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, everything else about the style follows from that, I think. And so in that way, Steinbeck was an awesome role model for me, but also a very confusing one, because within his body of work, he goes about landscape and its uses in many different ways.
Yeah. And it is sort of a thing. I've been actually a little bit, some of those books, particularly East of Eden, were always loomed so large in my sort of literary consciousness when I would think about my own writing. Mm-hmm. But I've been a little hesitant to revisit them for exactly the reasons that you mentioned before. That
interesting.
I don't know if I could come back to that story and love it the same way that I used to, knowing, having grown as a sort of socially conscious person.
Sure.
In the interim.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I really wasn't intending to spend so much time talking to you about a different writer.
It's so tempting, though. It's such a good hook. But yeah, let's talk about other stuff.
So another thing that really struck me about your book is how sort of haunted the whole story is, and this goes from the very first line of the book, which when he's 50 years dead, she dreams she's gone back, all the way through to the very end, the final scene, and thinking about how present history and the people from the past are in the present of this book, whatever the present moment might be, whether it's 1940 or 1998. And it was just really striking to me, that feeling of there being ghosts in the room.
Yeah.
That is something that I have always felt, and I kind of wondered if it had something to do with the place that we grew up.
I absolutely think so. It's such a gorgeous place, but my youth there was and there's a reference to this in the book somewhere. My youth there, and to a certain extent my adulthood, has been marred by a lot of very weird tragedies that have taken place in that landscape. And yeah, that sense of haunting has always remained with me, very specifically in that location. I don't know. How about you? Do you have a similar experience or no?
Yeah. I mean, in a couple of different ways. Like, there's a line in here in the book, and I think I can't remember. It's in one of the later chapters where she's remembering a period in the 70s where there were a whole bunch of suicides or just people having accidents or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that was like, it kind of made me jump a little bit. That was obviously before I was born. Or maybe not obviously, but, I was born in 79.
I was too.
But it really kind of shook me a little bit how that mirrored my own experience. And I graduated from high school in 1997. And I remember a few years later, there was this article in the Carmel Pinecone about how the class of 96 in particular at Carmel High had like a ton of dead students already. And
that's what I was kind of obliquely and clumsily referencing earlier, because I graduated in 96 and was friends with some of those kids, and actually lost a friend from that class last year to suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah, growing up, there was a strange omnipresence to that kind of grief and self-destructive capacity just kind of lurking behind the scenes of an externally very beautiful existence. And it was hard for that not to infiltrate the way that I saw and continue to see the place. I'm back there a lot still. My dad still lives there. I have a network of family friends that is as close to me as family, so I'm there a ton. But yeah, there's like you were saying, there's a small town feel to it that's also, at least for me, tainted by a lot of darkness.
Yeah.
But that the strange thing is that it doesn't make it any less beautiful to me. Maybe that's one of the strange ways in which I see beauty.
Me too.
Which is not to say I think any of those tragic events were beautiful, because they were not. They were awful and tragic. But as a writer, Jesus,
Yeah.
you can only hope for that kind of deep emotional connection to a place. And I think that's why I started writing the book in the first place. And honestly, I think it's why it took me so long for me to finish it, is because I wanted to properly pay homage to that extraordinarily conflicted feeling of love and fear and grief and beauty and ugliness and all that stuff. Which I think, to circle back to, the title of the book, what better receptacle, literally and figuratively, than the ocean, in all its beauty and mystery and danger. I see the ocean in a similar way as I see Monterey and the surrounding areas. I'm fascinated by it. I'm appreciative of it. I spend a lot of time in it, but I'm also fearful. I know what's in there. Like, it's like, Jesus. There's a lot of scary stuff. Mm-hmm. But again, how great to be able to write about it.
So for the second segment, I always ask my guests to bring a topic of their own, just whatever they're thinking about, whatever they might find interesting. And what would you like to talk about?
Well, I would like to talk about modes of creative expression. I've known you via Twitter for like a short period of time. Mm-hmm. And of course I knew you when we were kids, but I never really got to know you at that point. But in the short time I've kind of gotten to know you from a distance, I've been very struck by how many outlets you have for your creative impulses. And I think I said as much to you over email or whatever. I'm kind of a one-trick pony as far as writing is concerned. Like, that's my thing. And I just want to talk about what it's like to have. How do you choose if you're going to take a photograph of it or write a poem about it, or how does that even happen for you? I'm so confused.
It's funny, and I said this back to you already, but that I just think it's so funny that you'd think of yourself as a one-trick pony, where be thinking positively about what I do, because I'm exactly the opposite in that, like, I'm constantly sort of berating myself for not sticking with one thing and not sort of seeing it through and really getting good at anything. Mm-hmm. Whereas I see somebody like you, or like, many other artists and writers that I know, that they have their thing, and that's their thing that they know and that they focus on and really achieve mastery over. And I'm always just so jealous of that. Like, I really wish I could just stick to one thing and that be my thing, Somehow it never ends up happening.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was almost hesitant I had a career before becoming like a full-time writer of fiction. I had like several possible careers actually, and I always knew that writing was the thing, but there was a lot of fear involved in recognizing that. Not necessarily because I was afraid of failure, but because I knew it would change my brain. Like I was telling you earlier, I tried to drop my kid off at school today when there was actually no school. For some reason, I knew that would happen to me. Attaching myself to the creation of alternate worlds would mess with my reality. And so the decision to enter into that was a prolonged and difficult one for me. And yeah, just being a writer affects me so much that I can't even imagine having other aesthetic concerns in mind. I would probably be non-functional. I don't know what I'd do. Do you see photography as akin to writing in terms of it being an alternate world for you, or do you see it as a different manifestation of an existing reality?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that I think is really different about fiction writing and anything that I do, whether it's photography or what, is that fiction writing is really an act of creation. It's like even people who are writing stuff where the details come out of their life, where you're taking these things and you're making something completely new out of it. Mm-hmm. And construction is something that I have always had a really hard time with. That, if I have any talent at all, it's for observation, not for construction.
Oh, interesting.
I actually, when you were saying this thing, though, like, I think it's really fascinating to hear you talk about living in this other world, because I often feel like I only barely live in the world. Like, I'm so...
Oh my God, me too. Me too. And that's another thing that interests me about photography and any kind of like visual art, is I think that does require an engagement with the outside world that I swear to God, until I had kids, I wasn't sure I actually possessed. Like an awareness of my body in space, how a room was lit, what was inside the room. My internal world took so much precedence that it's only been as an adult that I could even conceive of like, oh, that's something I might want to photograph or paint. And I find it very interesting, like people like you who can exist simultaneously and analytically and aesthetically in that external world and the internal world. Because for me, it's always been so much of an either or. Yeah.
See, like, for me, I'm just constantly like impressed and amazed and insanely jealous of people who can make something out of nothing, who can make something exist that didn't exist before. Where, like, and there are photographers and certainly painters and sculptors and other visual artists who do that. And it's particularly one of the things that I have trouble with approaching other visual arts, particularly painting. One is that my hands are pretty clumsy, but more just that, like I say, like building something, and is something that's always very hard for me. Whereas taking a thing that's already there and sort of maybe explaining it in a different way is where I'm able to, if I'm able to do anything effectively, that's what it is.
Do you teach? You should be a teacher. These sound like very, very good skills for a teacher of especially, like, complex. I mean, to me, electrical engineering sounds profoundly complex, but maybe that's because I have absolutely no basis of knowledge whatsoever. But I would assume that's a process of creation, or no?
It is, but the particular discipline that I do is more about being thorough than being insightful or creative.
Yeah.
And there is an aesthetics to a really good design. There's engineers always talk about elegant designs, and problem solving and things like that. But for the most part, the practicing engineer has taken someone else's idea, someone else higher up who's decided this is the thing that we want, and then figured out how to realize that given the parameters you're working in. So
okay.
It's very different, I find, than creative expression is.
Sure.
And no, I don't teach. I would love to, but right now the only way I can figure out how to get people to listen to me is by having a podcast.
Podcasts are awesome. I love podcasts. I'm wondering too if how does parenthood figure into it for you?
Oh, geez. Yeah, parenthood, like everything that I would say that I've always had an impulse towards creativity for a long time, but what really was sort of the catalyst for my present endeavors was becoming a parent. That I'd always had an interest in photography, but I left it by the wayside after high school. And then my wife bought me a camera like a month before, for my birthday, a month before our son was born, our first. And that that impulse to document, like I'm sure this, like everybody does this, right? Like you take pictures of your kids too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then trying to see those pictures as something beyond just documentation and as something expressive, that was huge. And it was like the work that I have that is, if I have any work that's known at all, it's all family based.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, the parenthood thing. Plus there's a thing about parenthood that, if nothing else, I really feel like parenthood really makes you aware of the passage of time.
Yes. Very true. Very true. I mean, it's so simultaneously slow and light speed.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's, people often ask me, like, why did it take you so long to write this book? And I'm like, because I have children. And, that's the other aspect of I don't know why I'm so concerned about my brain and its usage, but that was another concern I had in terms of becoming a writer, is I also knew I wanted to become a parent, and the two are not compatible.
No.
I think there's a lot of talk about, like, you can do it, and there are certain ways in which it makes it better, but it never makes it easier.
No.
Kids don't make anything easier. But I love it, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But it's still, it's deeply challenging, and I do worry about them reading the book.
Really?
They desperately want to. Yeah. My 7-year-old is an excellent reader. She hasn't picked it up yet, at least not to my knowledge. But
I guess 7 is a little young.
7 is a little young. But I have a lot of nieces and nephews who are in middle school right now. And their parents have been asking me, "Oh, you think they can read it?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Maybe." Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. I'm kind of used to being the black sheep of my extended family. So whatever they find in the book will probably confirm whatever suspicions they already have. Yeah. So that's perfectly fine with me.
That's something I think about all the time with my own kids. Like what can I expose them to? Like what books, what movies?
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because like I'm already way, way more careful about that stuff than anybody in my childhood was. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah, I was reading really inappropriate things when I was very, very young.
Like what was the book you remembered the most as being like going off the deep end for you?
Well, the one I don't know how big of a science fiction or fantasy how familiar you are with that stuff, but like the sort of canonical example I always bring up is that when I was like 7 years old, I read this series of books by Stephen Donaldson called the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever. Okay. And these are like, fortunately, I did not really understand a lot of stuff until much later. And I've read those books probably. It's a trilogy, and I've read them probably 4 or 5 times now over the course of my life. And every time I come back to them, I'm like, holy shit, I read this when I was 7?
Yeah. Oh, man. Like sex stuff, or like what was in there that was...
Well, like, I mean, one of the early things that happens that, like I didn't even really think about how problematic, not even just like for a kid to be reading, but for it to be in a book at all, is like one of the primary motive things. So first of all, the main character is a leper. And he's a writer who's a leper, and he hates himself, and he hates himself very consistently throughout the books. And he wakes up and finds himself in a fantasy land at one point, and that's what the whole thing is about. And like one of the first things that happens is that he's so overwhelmed by having feeling back in his extremities that he like rapes the first girl that he meets, more or less. And it's like,
Oh, wow.
Jesus Christ, I cannot believe I read this when I was that young.
That's crazy.
And like also,
you turned out fine.
I mean, maybe.
My husband read American Psycho when he was 12.
Eeh.
Yeah, I know. And he's perfectly, like, I guess, I don't know. He seems all right.
Yeah. Or even just,
I never know what to do with my kids.
yeah.
I feel like visual media, it's a pretty clear, at least for me. I'm like, yeah, this is happening. This is not happening. But part of me would love to believe that the content of books and the style in which they're written, it's kind of a built-in buffer against premature exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Like if a 7-year-old can read Tropic of Cancer, but it's not gonna stick probably. I don't know.
Yeah.
One would hope.
One would hope. Yeah, it's such a funny thing. I'm always happy to talk about family-related stuff, but I especially on the show, I don't like to be the one to bring it up because I feel like it's kind of a fraught topic, especially when people talk about family and work. And I know for myself, my first major series of photographs is, as I said, it's a sort of exploration of the family experience and of ephemerality and the emotions of being a parent. This sort of bittersweet experience that I have of being a parent, and there's complexity, I hope, in that, and it's an experience that is semi-universal that a lot of people can relate to. But often, I find that particularly men over a certain age, when they're reviewing my work, can be really like, why are you making work about family? Like, nobody cares about this stuff. This is like, these are great for you. You should put them in a photo album, but like, why are you showing these to people?
How interesting.
And I know that is often for women a thing where it's like, if they find out that you have kids, then they'll be like, then people will only want to talk about that. When like in an interview or whatever, like, oh, or even just if you're out at a signing or something, that's, people, it's a common complaint that I hear from women writers that I know, that people always ask, like, oh, where are your kids? How come they're not here? As though, that's like the most important thing. I don't know. It's sort of, I think it's such an interesting thing because as an artist, like everything in your life is going to inform your work.
Yeah.
And becoming a parent, I feel like, is one of those things that fundamentally changes the way a person thinks about the world. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's like the politics of it can be very, I don't know, uncomfortable, Do you think that the early series you mentioned that focused on family and more domestic concerns, do you think the response to that would have been different if you were a woman? Absolutely. How so? Well, I actually I can say exactly, because a lot of people that I've connected with, people that I reached out to who were early inspirations of mine, or who I found afterwards that their work really resonated, were women who were making photographs about their families. Okay. And one of the most interesting things is like I said, like both they and I get a certain amount of dismissal from people, particularly from older men, about like, why don't you make works that's serious? Right. But the main difference that I've seen is that, like, from a lot of people, and particularly from like women over maybe 50 who review my work, will like kind of congratulate me for making this kind of work as a man. Like, you don't really see dads doing, such like sensitive stuff very often, you seem like you're really involved. That's great. Where like, I don't know of a single woman photographer who makes this kind of work that has gotten that, it's really heavily like stigmatized to be making work that feels maternal. so yeah, definitely, if I were a woman, I expect that I would have even more difficulties.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder how much as a culture we're still caught up in the notion of the artist devoted solely to art, and the simultaneous deification and demonization of people who make other choices. As a photographer, Diane Arbus is probably an example of like literally running away from your family to join the circus and devoting yourself solely to that with extraordinary personal repercussions. And that's often painted as bravery, which I'm sure it did require bravery.
Yeah.
But I don't think
there's
a certain romance to it, but I'm not sure, as a society we've quite explored the bravery of staying put and staying committed, and to be perfectly frank, what a badass choice that can be sometimes. Like how punk rock being an involved parent can be. I'm not sure if punk rock is exactly what I was going for there.
Yeah. I think it's, there's one thing about contemporary art, whether it's literary or visual, is that there is, I think, a fascination with sort of the more mundane or prosaic elements of life, and seeing how there is complexity even in that, and how, and that's something that I really enjoy about the present artistic moment.
Yeah.
Even
I do too. But that being said, and this could change dramatically, but I don't ever see myself penning a work of domestic realism.
Yeah.
Like I appreciate people who have that impulse, but like, for instance, the book I'm working on right now is bananas, and it has to do even more explicitly with issues of haunting and possession and semi-paranormal activity. And I don't know, part of me feels maybe that's a response to the mundane domesticity of the rest of my existence right now. Is that, the last thing I want to do personally is drill down into that. But there may be a point in my life when I do.
Well.
But yeah, I always admire the writers that I envy the most, and a lot of those are working in that space right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm reading Pond right now, and that's not necessarily. I don't know. I guess that is domestic, but not necessarily realism. But yeah, there's a lot out there to explore in that regard for sure.
Yeah, and the great thing is that there's room for working in lots of different ways.
Yes.
So we don't have that, and that is certainly another thing that I feel like there's an interesting thing, and this is particularly true for women, but to some degree it's true for at least some men, that there can be sort of a simultaneous pressure to, I don't know, to work in certain ways. Like I know some women feel like there's a moment happening to explore domesticity a little more, and they don't necessarily want to work on that. Other women I've talked to have felt like exactly the opposite, where it's like they feel like they're constantly being pushed not to work in those spaces, and they do want to. But I think like having like this time right now is fascinating in how wide open stuff is.
Yeah.
To me anyway. Yeah,
definitely. And if you add issues of race and ethnicity to that question, it becomes even more interesting.
Yeah.
People having to be standard bearers for their culture when they might not even want to do that, when they may just want to write something that isn't representative of a generalized experience.
Mm-hmm.
In a way that, a woman might not want to write something that has to do solely with traditional feminist concerns. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of discussion, and man, a lot of it is heated. That I'm a relative newcomer to social media, especially Twitter, and it was something I I wasn't sure I wanted to do. And it's been absolutely fascinating to me. It's like a whole different dimension of the world as I cracked open the kind of discussions that are happening online with this. And it's opened my eyes in so many regards and just scared the nonsense out of me in other regards too, because, voices are amplified and reactions are big. And I want to be as respectful as possible, but also as free as possible. And navigating that has been, especially with the second book, which takes kind of a broader view of American society than my first book does. It's, that impulse to simultaneously tread carefully and to ignore polite convention. It's hard. It's hard. At least for me. I don't know. Maybe it'll get easier, but we shall see. Yeah. Do you find that tension in your work?
In my photography, because my photography tends to be extremely personal. That's, if nothing else, one of the things that I've come to, largely, like you said, through social media and that kind of thing, especially over the past couple of years. But one thing that I know now is that it's always okay to talk about your own experience. And that doing that, especially if you are doing it in an open way, it doesn't exclude the possibility of other people talking about their experience.
Sure.
But I think, there's particularly with my writing lately, I've been finding that I have a lot more desire to talk about different aspects of my experience that speak to race or wealth or, other more socially charged issues. And in those cases, like you say, there's a sort of, you do want to say the thing you want to say, but you don't want to have the thing that, like, I don't want the fact that I said this thing that I needed to say to feel like I'm telling other people how to feel or what they can and can't say.
Sure.
So there is some, I don't know, sometimes I write something like a poem or something and then I think, maybe I won't show this one to people.
Yeah, but I think that protective impulse is also important for your work too. That's something that's been very jarring for me about this recent phase of my career is, something I worked on in private for so long, becoming a public commodity. And, the expectation, that I'm up in front of it to promote it and sell it, which for the most part has been an absolutely wonderful experience. But it's also very odd, that sudden, unprotected aspect of the work. And it's gotten easier, in the weeks and months since the book has been out. But yeah, I don't really have other work. I'm not a poet. I've written maybe like 2 short stories. So there's not a lot that I have just to myself, artistically. And I kind of envy that you do.
I wonder how many times we can go back and forth and say that we envy each other.
I know. I want your life, Mike. I want San Diego. That sounds nice.
It's got its charms.
Yeah.
But it's funny. For somebody like me, the amount of success or acceptance that I've been able to find for my work, it's just always such a struggle, and it's something that I think is interesting. Like I was talking to some friends about this concept of artistic success and what that means, and there's always this thing about, you have to make the work for yourself, but there's also like, if you don't care what people think, then like why would you share it at all? And we were talking about how there's like different ways that that success and impact with the audiences can manifest. And like, for example, you have somebody like John Greenleaf Whittier, who in his lifetime was hailed as, one of the the great American poets, and people thought that he would have this huge artistic legacy and that people would be reading Whittier forever. And now, like, almost nobody reads Whittier and nobody really cares, other than like, literary scholars perhaps. But on the other hand, you have somebody like Emily Dickinson, or in photography, somebody like Vivian Maier, who at least the mythology is that they were complete unknowns, that their work just ended up in a drawer or in a closet or something and was discovered after they died. But that legacy has continued on forever. And there's this thing about, I look around at, somebody like you who has, like, I think the publication of a novel has in itself like sort of a built-in acceptance to it, right? Like, in order to even get to that point, the work has to have been accepted to a point. Right. And obviously what impact it has after that and how it sells and what people say about it, that still has yet to be seen. But even getting to that point, there's a certain level of, I did that. That for me is something like that I try not to be, but occasionally I can find myself envious of,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard because, it is a, especially with fiction writing, there are like a series of clear benchmarks. And I remember feeling exactly the same way, but the illusion there is that you'll feel differently once the benchmarks are
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily, does posterity matter to you? Do you care?
Yes and no. On one level, I kind of feel like I'm not sure if I would, like, to what extent I would care about the work being widely seen if I didn't care at all about posterity. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there's also, certainly an acknowledgement that, like, well, after I'm dead, like, I'm not going to care. And there's no way that it could affect me. So what's the difference?
Right.
But I think more like a lot of the reason that I want to make the work in the first place is to have a moment of connection with potentially with audience members, or just with another person at all. And that's certainly something that has nothing to do with posterity.
Right.
What about you?
Oh, I'm like a huge hypocrite when it comes to this. Because I always, I'm like, I don't believe in an afterlife in which I will be looking down on my own successes and failures in perpetuity. But then again, I've told my husband, like, if you publish anything posthumously, like journals or unfinished work of mine, I will come back to haunt you, because nothing to me seems more repulsive than having unpolished work out there. So I don't know how I feel about it. I guess I'm like you in that way. Full disclosure, my husband just passed the childcare torch to me. He had to leave for a meeting. He's an entrepreneur and has his own business, so we have weird schedules. So I am currently with my daughter, who's watching My Little Pony on the iPad, but I do not know how much longer she'll be quiet.
Well, we've been going a good long time. So, and actually, I think that was not a terrible place to wrap up. But there's just one other thing that I decided I just wanted to add one more little thing to the end of each episode, and that is to ask you, what is some piece of art or literature that has meant something to you recently?
Oh, good question. I was very pleasantly surprised by Emma Rathbone's Losing It, which I think was marketed as kind of a female-oriented beach read type thing. But it surprised me. It's a meditation on losing one's virginity relatively late in life, but just the humor and honesty and just the surprising way in which she wrote about it was very cool. It makes me want to seek out her earlier work for sure and delve deeper into that. It was in a lot of ways the perfect summer read for me, as someone who normally hates quote unquote summer reads. And deep down was kind of appalled my book came out in July. Emma Rathbone's Losing It was something I did read on vacation at the beach that was wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really a pleasure to get reconnected after all this time.
Yeah, and
It's a cool way.
Yeah. Okay, so if you want to check out Lindsay's book, Monterey Bay, you can find it wherever books are sold. I've also included a link to her website in the show notes. That includes a description plus links to a bunch of different online retailers where you can get a copy. And as I said at the top of the show, I really enjoyed it and give it my full recommendation, so check it out. And that is our show. If you want to get in touch with me, leave a comment or question, you can email me at podcast@keepthechannelopen.com, or you can find me and the show on Twitter at ChannelOpenPod or on Facebook at facebook.com/keepthechanneleopen. If you'd like to help out the show, please leave a review on iTunes. There's a link in the show notes for that as well. And don't forget that you can subscribe to the show and get automatically updated with every new episode. You can do that wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, your favorite podcast apps. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can find more of his music available for licensing at soundofpicture.com. Next time, I'll be talking with San Diego artist Alexander Konka, so stay tuned for that. Until then, remember, keep the channel open.